Hi guys, let's talk about the intracranial hemorrhage, but before jumping to this topic, let's have a look on meninges first. Meninges are actually the membranes which covers the CNS. CNS means brain and spinal cord. So these meninges covers both brain and spinal cord. The meninges is actually composed of three layers. The outermost is the dura mater, next to it is the arachnoid matter, and then the pia mater. Okay, this is the dura mater, the green one covering whole brain and spinal cord. Next to it in the blue one is the arachnoid matter, and next to it the innermost is the pia mater in the red one. Okay, so first start the dura mater. Dura mater, which is the outermost layer, actually it's composed of the two layers, the periosteal layer and the meningeal layer. The outer is the periosteal, the inner is the meningeal layer. The periosteum, as its name indicates, there's something which is around the bone. So the periosteal layer is the one which is nearmost to the skull bone, while next to it is the meningeal layer. In between these two layers, there is no any real space present, while at some places these both layers get separate and forms a space which we call it as a dural sinus or cerebral sinus or venous sinuses. Actually, these sinuses are responsible for draining the cerebral veins. Okay, now there is a difference between in these layers of the brain, like periosteal layer and meningeal layer of the brain and periosteal and meningeal layer of the spinal cord, as the dura mater covers both brain and spinal cord, as we know that. So these both layers don't have any space in case of the brain, while the dura mater, which covers the spinal cord, that dura mater having the space in between these two layers. Okay, the periosteal layer, meningeal layer having a real space in the spinal cord when it covers the spinal cord, and that space containing the areolar tissue, the lymphatics, and the vascular tissues. Okay, the word dura actually means strong, tough, thick. So this layer is actually very strong layer, and the matter means mother, as it is composed of the dense irregular connective tissue. So it is very strong layer. Okay, at some areas the dura mater forms folds or septas, and the purpose of these folds is to prevent the excessive movement of the brain. Okay, excessive movement of the brain, because if the brain excessively move, it can lead to the rupture of the vessels, and these rupture can lead to the hemorrhage. So the intracranial hemorrhage, one of the cause is the intracranial hemorrhage is the excessive movement of the brain, and these folds prevent these excessive movements. Okay, so in these folds, number one is a falx cerebri. It is the one which separates the two cerebral hemispheres. So it is present like this. It is present in between the two cerebral hemispheres. Okay, next one is the tentorium cerebelli. It is actually dividing the brain into the supratentorial area. This is the tentorium cerebelli. The upper part to the tentorium cerebelli is the supratentorial area. The lower part to the tentorium cerebelli is the infratentorial area. Okay, so this part, the supratentorial area containing two cerebral hemispheres, while the infratentorial area containing the cerebellum, the brainstem, and the spinal corridor. Clear? Next is the diaphragma celli. It is one of the layer which is covering, actually it is present here, I elaborated there. This is the red one is the diaphragma celli. It is surrounding the pituitary stalk. Actually, this is the hypothalamus. These two are the pituitary glands. The connecting source of these two is the pituitary stalk, this black line, and the diaphragma celli, which is actually surrounding the pituitary stalk. Okay. Next is the falx cerebelli. It is actually present in between the two cerebellar hemispheres. So the first one is present where? In between the two cerebral hemispheres, and this one, falx cerebelli, is actually present between the two cerebellar hemispheres. Okay. Now there are spaces, different spaces. The spaces form how? The space between the layers, we call it as a space, like the space between dura mater and arachnoid mater, we call it as a space. The space present between the arachnoid and pia mater, we call it a space. The space present between these two layers, or like the space between the dura mater and the skull bone, we call it a name. Okay, let's move towards it. Like epidural space, it is that space which is present between these two layers or between the dura mater and the skull bone. The subdural space, as its name indicates, like some space which is below the dura. So this space is actually present in between the dura and arachnoid matter. Okay. Next is come towards the arachnoid matter. But before jumping here, I want to mention one thing, this respective to the dural sinuses. Actually, these folds, like the dural folds, at some places these folds get widened and forms these sinuses. Okay, so these sinuses are actually present in the folds, in these folds, falx cerebelli, tentorium cerebelli. Okay, now in the falx cerebelli, this what, like in the superior part of the falx cerebelli, there is superior sagittal sinus. Okay, in the inferior part, there is inferior sagittal sinus. Clear? In the tentorium cerebelli, there is straight sinus and the transverse sinus. Okay, actually this straight sinus is a continuation of the great cerebral vein, like the great cerebral vein drain into the straight sinus. Now, what is confluence of sinuses? It is a point where multiple sinuses drain into it, like the superior one, the inferior one, the greater cerebral vein, the straight veins. They all drain into the confluence of sinuses, and then they drain into the transverse sinuses. Okay, and then the transverse sinus then drain into the sigmoid sinus, and in the sigmoid sinus also the cavernous sinus, which drain through the superior and the inferior petrosa sinuses, they drain into the sigmoid sinus, and then the sigmoid sinus drain into the internal jugular vein, and then this vein drain into the right heart to get oxygenation. Okay, so the next layer is the arachnoid matter. Arachnoid matter is the second layer, as I mentioned there. As the word arachnoid means spider, so this matter is actually composed of trabecular network, which is a connecting source. These are the trabeculi, okay, the blue lines, the small lines. These are the trabeculi arising from the arachnoid matter layer, and it is connecting with the pia matter. Okay, and this layer is avascular, A for arachnoid, A for avascular, AA. So learn in this way. And the space, like I talked about the epidural space, the subdural space, there is also space like subarachnoid, like a space present below the arachnoid, and we know that the layer next to the arachnoid is the pia. So this space is actually in between the arachnoid matter and the pia matter. Okay, so subarachnoid space is that one which is in between the arachnoid matter and the pia matter. Actually, in this space there is CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. And next point is that in dural sinuses, this one, the dural sinus, in dural sinuses the CSF also drain into it. Clear? So in dural sinuses, not only the cerebral veins, the venous blood drain into it, but also the CSF also drain into it. Clear? Next one is the pia matter. It's the innermost layer. Pia means soft and matter means mother. It is a very soft layer, highly vascular, made up of connective tissue, and very delicate layer. And this is the innermost layer. Okay, when we talk about the pia and arachnoid matter together, we give it a word like leptomeninges. Leptomeninges means pia plus arachnoid. Okay, now I want to show you this end point of what? Spinal cord and the meninges. Okay, this the lower end point of the spinal cord in the black I mentioned here, the conus medullaris. This is the lower end of the spinal cord. The pia matter is actually not extending, it's just at the point of the conus medullaris. It does not extend down with the other two membranous layers like arachnoid and dura. Actually, the spinal cord in adults ends at the L2 level, while the pia is also ends there. While the other two layers like arachnoid and the dura matter, they are extending. They are extending where? They are extending to the L4 and L5 levels. Okay, and the pia matter arising a string of pia, which we call it the red line, phylum terminal. Okay, and as we know, in the subarachnoid space there is a CSF, so the dots are showing the CSF. It shows a very good point, like a nature's beauty. Like this CSF, as we do lumbar puncture for many purposes, to diagnose many diseases, and for that we draw out the CSF. So this is giving a very good place to draw out the CSF without damaging spinal cord, as the spinal cord ends above and CSF is still present below it. So this space is a point where we do the lumbar puncture, because there's no any spinal cord, no any danger that we would damage the nerves. So at this place we draw out the CSF in case we do the lumbar puncture. Okay, so this is the end. Thank you.